In this lesson, I'm going to talk to you about the difference between an ASP.NET website and an ASP.NET web application, and hopefully give you enough information to make a decision as to which type of project you'd like to choose. So what exactly are the major differences between websites and web applications? Well, to start off, the way that you deploy and maintain a website is going to be quite different from the way that you deploy or maintain a web application. The other major difference is your development style, what your preferences are, whether you want to choose a web application or web style. So let's talk a little bit more in detail about both of those. So let's take a look at some of the deployment differences. A website does not have to be precompiled. However, you do have the option of doing this. And for the sake of this discussion, we're going to talk about it without it being precompiled. So when you deploy a website, you deploy both the ASPX page as well as the code file that's associated with that page. The server then takes care of compiling that at runtime. That means that when you have small changes to your websites, you don't have to precompile or the entire application and redeploy it. All you have to do is deploy just that one page where you had the change, or the few pages where you had the change. In web application, your whole site has to be precompiled prior to deployment. So you precompile it, then what you deploy is just the ASPX page, but you don't deploy the code files to the server. Instead, you have a bin directory that everything that is precompiled goes into, and you deploy the one DLL that's in the bin directory to the server. Any changes that you want to do to your web application then require you to recompile the entire application and then deploy the entire DLL to the server. What about the development differences? On a website, you can actually mix your programming languages. In other words, you can have both C# and VB.NET code files in your websites. That's not to say that that's a standard practice or a best practice, but it does give you a little bit of flexibility in case you do need to have that option. Public functions within each page are not visible to the other pages. That's pretty important to note, since in web applications they are. Utility classes, such as other external functions that you want to have available to your entire application, you can't put those directly in just in your folder wherever you want, but they have to be put in a special ASP.NET website folder. It's called the app code folder. In a web application, you choose your language when you start your project, just like a Windows or console application. When you begin the project, you choose which language you want, and you can only allow one programming language for the entire application. Public functions are visible to other pages because the entire site or application gets compiled into one DLL. Therefore, they're all visible to each other. So if you've got some public functions in one page that you want to call from another page, you can do that. Utility classes, for the same reason, can be placed anywhere in the project folder structure. You don't have to put them in a special app code folder or anything like that. They can just be put directly in at the root directory. You could just have a class there with utility functions inside of it. So let's take a look at some code. First of all, let's take a look. I'll start off by creating a new web application. Create a new project. You notice that web application is found under the project, new project selection. I'll go ahead and choose Visual C#. Go ahead and choose web application. We'll go into C demos. Notice that it goes into a location, C:\demos, and I'll choose web application. I need to give it a name. First web app. And I do get to choose which framework I want to use. Notice that it creates my default.aspx just as expected. Default.aspx has an associated default CS file and a designer file with it as well. If I right-click on my first web application project, I have the ability to add a new item. From here I can add a web form. I could just call this login.aspx, and it will add a new page directly to the project for me. close out of both of these. Now that we've got the first web app ready, let's go ahead and add a site. I can either right-click on my solution, or I can go to File, Add, New Website. Notice I'm not adding a new project, I'm adding a new website. I'm adding it to the current solution. And the only options that I have deal with websites or web services. Again, I can choose my framework, .NET 3.5. We'll go ahead and go with Visual C#. And notice that the location that I have, I can either specify a file system, HTTP, or FTP. So I can go directly to an FTP site from here. And notice again that I don't have to specify a location and the name of the project. That's because the folder, the final folder, will actually be the name of the website that gets created. So we'll go ahead and call this first web site. Click OK, and that adds my first website and adds my default.aspx with associated CS file. Now when I right-click on my folder, I can choose Add New Item, and under Add New Item, they're going to be a little bit different. Of course, we still have our web form, but notice the default name is default2, minor difference. But we'll go ahead and call this login.aspx. One difference here is, instead of Visual C#, I can actually choose Visual Basic as the language. So we'll click Add, and you'll notice that my default.aspx has a C# file, and my login.aspx has a VB file as the code behind it. If I tried to add a new item under my web application, notice there is no option to choose Visual Basic. The only option that I have is Visual C#. Let's take a look at the difference between adding utility classes. So in my first web app, I'll go ahead and go to the application folder. I'll right-click on the first web app and choose Add New Item. This time I want to add some code. The only thing I want to add is just a code file. We'll just call it utility.cs. We'll click Add. Notice that it was added directly in the root directory of my web application, just where I placed it. It just adds a code file. We'll just make it a class, public class utility. Public string, say hello. Specify return hello. And so there we've got our utility function that has a simple, our utility class that has a simple function called say hello, and we'll just say hello to whatever string was passed in. And returns a string. Let's add that similar utility class in our website. I'll right-click on my website folder here, choose Add New Item, and I can't filter it by code type, so I'm just going to have to look for a class. We'll choose a class. Just for sake of consistency, we'll use C#, and we'll call it utility. Click Add. Notice a pop-up message that comes up that says you're attempting to add a special file type class to an ASP.NET website. The message here basically states that I won't be able to reference the code inside of this class unless it's in my app code folder. So it prompts me to actually place it in my app code folder and asks me if I want to continue. Yes, I do. It'll put it in my app code folder. It'll actually add the app code folder if it isn't already there, and it'll put it inside of there. It adds some additional references, puts utility.cs location. We'll just add, that is my constructor. I don't need to worry about the constructor. We'll just add a public string, say hello, string. Return hello name. And there we've got my utility class that has a simple function, say hello, just like before. The main difference, as I noted, is that we've got this app code folder that's available in the website, and we don't have such an app code folder inside of the first web application. To briefly explain why this happens, you have to know a little bit about deployment. Again, when I compile a web application, all of the code pages associated with all of my pages get compiled and get placed into the bin folder. So everything's pre-compiled and gets put into the bin folder. That means every single class, including this utility.cs, gets compiled into one giant DLL, depending on how big your application is, and gets stored in the bin folder. Because they're all in the same DLL, public methods are available one from another. In my website, notice that I have a C# file and a VB file. Well, if I was using the same compiler to compile them all into one DLL, I wouldn't be able to have them be different languages. What happens is that each page and the code associated with it gets compiled into its own DLL at runtime, and because it's its own DLL and the login.aspx is its own DLL, I can't reference the code from one to the other. That also means that if I had my utility class at the root level, it would be just a floating DLL out there that I don't have a reference to from either of these pages. Therefore, websites, a new app code folder is created, and all code files get put inside of here, and that gets compiled into one DLL, and automatically ASP.NET automatically adds a reference to any code that's inside of this app code folder. Therefore, I do now have access from my default.aspx and my login.aspx to access the code inside of here. That's pretty much it for this lesson. We'll talk about deployment of both websites and web applications in other videos. So please watch for those videos, and thank you for coming to LearningToCode.net.